The heavy thud of the bolt sliding home on the other side of the attic door echoed in the suffocating silence. My breath hitched. My heart slammed against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I lunged, yanking the cold, unyielding brass knob. I was locked in. Panic, icy and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. Below, through the thick floorboards, I could hear them, the low, solemn murmur of voices. My father's funeral reception. And the architect of my prison? My stepmom Brenda. The woman who was supposed to be grieving with me had just sealed me in this dusty tomb, desperate to keep me from Dad's will reading. A wave of nausea hit me. Grief warred with a sudden, furious rage. She wouldn't win. As my eyes strained to adjust to the choking gloom, filled with forgotten things and the scent of decay, I had no idea that the very dust motes dancing in the single sliver of light held the key to her spectacular downfall. I was about to find something that would change everything. My name is Chloe, and just a few years ago, as a young woman barely out of college and starting my career in marketing, my life felt wonderfully, beautifully normal. My world was anchored by my incredible father, Arthur. Mom had passed away when I was very young, leaving a gentle, hazy memory of bedtime stories and the scent of lavender. Dad, bless his heart, became both parents to me. He was an architect, renowned not just for his brilliant designs but for his unwavering kindness and integrity. He taught me to sketch, to dream big, and most importantly, to always stand up for what's right. Our home wasn't extravagant, but it was filled with laughter, the aroma of his baking. He made a surprisingly good apple pie, and the comforting presence of books stacked in every corner. Life was secure, predictable in the most comforting way. I felt safe. Then, about 5 years before Dad got sick, he met Brenda. It was at some work function, a charity dinner, I think. She was captivating in a glossy magazine cover sort of way, with a dazzling smile and an air of sophisticated charm that Dad, who had been lonely for years, found irresistible. They married whirlwind fast, within 10 months. For Dad's sake, I genuinely tried to embrace her. He seemed lighter, happier, and his happiness was my priority. In those initial days, Brenda was the epitome of sweetness towards me. She'd coo over my fledgling marketing projects, ask about my day with feigned enthusiasm, and even buy me little gifts that felt a touch too calculated. But beneath the saccharine surface, I'd catch glimpses of something else. A fleeting iciness in her gaze when Dad praised my achievements, a subtle purse of her lips if I voiced an opinion that differed from hers. I dismissed these moments, chiding myself for being overly critical, maybe even a little possessive of Dad's attention. But a tiny, persistent splinter of unease lodged itself in my heart. Dad's illness crept in like a thief in the night. It began as a persistent cough he waved off as just a lingering bug, then a bone-deep weariness that stole the usual sparkle from his eyes. I was still living at home then, a recent graduate figuring out my next steps, and looking back, I'm so grateful for that extra time. It meant I saw the subtle shifts, the way his boundless energy slowly, heartbreakingly began to fade. The diagnosis, when it finally came, was a brutal blow, a rare and aggressive lung cancer. Brenda, at first, played the part of the devoted wife to perfection. She managed his appointments, clucked over his medications, and kept a vigilant watch. But as Dad grew weaker, her concern started to feel less like care and more like control. It started with small, almost unnoticeable erosions of my place in Dad's life. If I offered to brew his favorite Earl Grey tea the way he taught me, Brenda would materialize, smiling thinly, saying, "Oh, Chloe, darling, let me. You know how particular he is now." If I suggested sitting with him so she could take a break, she'd pat my arm dismissively. "It's no trouble, dear. I understand his needs." Access to my own father became a carefully curated experience, managed entirely by her. His oldest friends would call, and I'd later find out Brenda had told them he was too tired for visitors, though Dad would have loved to see them. His financial affairs, which he'd always handled with meticulous care, were suddenly entirely in her hands. "Don't you fret about these complicated things, Arthur," she'd say, her voice like velvet over steel while signing checks. "I'll take care of everything." A cold knot of anxiety would tighten in my stomach. This wasn't just a wife stepping up. It felt like a strategic takeover, a deliberate effort to isolate him and by extension me. The warmth of our home began to chill, replaced by a silent, simmering tension that only I seemed to acutely feel. I started to wonder, with a growing sense of dread, what her endgame truly was. The unsettling incidents began to accumulate, each one a small, sharp stone in the wall Brenda was methodically constructing around my father, and between him and me. I'd enter a room and any conversation between them would cease abruptly, Brenda flashing me a look that was a fraction too quick, too guarded. One afternoon her voice drifted from the closed study door, low and conspiratorial as she spoke on the phone. No, she was saying, everything is falling into place perfectly. He's much more agreeable these days. The previous arrangements won't be a concern for much longer. My blood turned to ice. Previous arrangements? What was she talking about? When I later gently prodded Dad, asking if everything was all right with his affairs, he just looked exhausted and offered a weak smile. Brenda's just a little overwhelmed, sweetheart. It's a lot for her. But my intuition screamed otherwise. She started making thinly veiled suggestions about my living situation. Chloe dear, she'd begin, her tone dripping with false solicitude, have you given any more thought to finding your own charming little apartment? It might be a wonderful step towards independence for you, especially with the future being so uncertain here. The cruelty of it, suggesting I move out while Dad was clearly fading, was breathtaking. It felt like she was already measuring the drapes for her solitary reign. My attempts to discuss Dad's actual medical care, or even just to share quiet, uninterrupted moments with him, were met with increasing resistance. He needs absolute tranquility, Chloe, she'd declare, effectively barring me from his room for extended periods. Then I noticed important documents like letters from Dad's longtime solicitor, Mr. Henderson, or revised insurance policies, vanishing from the mail pile before Dad or I could see them. When I asked, Brenda would just smile vaguely and say, "Oh, those? I've filed them away for safekeeping." My suspicion became a gnawing beast. She was actively concealing information, managing Dad's life and his assets with an iron grip, and Dad, frail and often sedated, seemed powerless against her. The vague unease I'd felt initially had morphed into a constant, sickening dread. She was plotting something big, something devastating. The day Dr. Ramirez called, requesting an urgent family meeting to discuss Dad's rapidly deteriorating condition, Brenda insisted on attending alone. "You're far too sensitive for this, Chloe," she'd stated, her expression a carefully crafted mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need to be composed and rational to hear what he has to say." When she returned hours later, her face was pale but set, and there was a strange, almost triumphant glint in her eyes that made my skin crawl. It wasn't just grief, it was calculation. She informed me, her voice flat, that Dad had mere weeks, possibly only days, left. The world fractured. My sorrow was a vast, crushing ocean, yet even through its suffocating waves, Brenda's behavior grew more overtly alarming. She began to speak frequently of Arthur's wishes, but these supposed wishes invariably aligned with her own desires. She'd casually pick up a valuable antique Dad had promised me years ago, murmuring, "Arthur always said he wanted me to have this beautiful clock. It would remind me so much of him." When I dared to gently correct her, reminding her of Dad's actual words, her eyes would turn to flint. "Don't be difficult, Chloe. Your father would despise any discord." Lies. My father valued harmony, yes, but he valued truth and fairness far more. He would never have sanctioned her greed. I started to feel like an intruder in the home I'd grown up in, an inconvenient obstacle to Brenda's plans. The air grew thick with her ambition, her barely concealed impatience. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she was systematically erasing my father's true intentions, preparing to seize everything he had worked his entire life for. The dread was no longer a whisper, it was a deafening roar in my ears. She was going to rob me not just of my inheritance but of my father's memory. Those final agonizing weeks were a nightmarish blur of hushed medical consultations, the sterile scent of antiseptic, and the oppressive weight of Brenda's constant watchful presence. She rarely left Dad's bedside, but her vigil felt less like wifely devotion and more like a dragon guarding its hoard. I clung to every precious stolen moment with him, my hand enveloping his, now so frail, whispering stories of my childhood, trying to burn the image of his tired, loving eyes into my memory. Once, his gaze sharpened with a desperate urgency. "Chloe," he rasped, his breath shallow, "the papers in my old desk." But before he could finish, Brenda glided in, a glass of water in her hand, her smile a chilling dismissal. "He's a bit muddled, dear," she cooed, stroking his forehead. "Just rest now, Arthur." Her eyes, when they met mine over his head, were chips of glacial ice. I never found out what he was trying to tell me. Not then, anyway. Dad slipped away on a bleak, rain-swept Tuesday morning. The silence he left in his wake was a living thing, vast and consuming. Brenda's grief, however, seemed curated. She produced a delicate lace handkerchief, dabbed at perfectly dry eyes, and was on the phone with the funeral director discussing arrangements within the hour, her voice unervingly crisp and businesslike. The funeral itself was a lavish, ostentatious affair, more a testament to Brenda's social aspirations, I felt, than a genuine tribute to Dad. Throngs of her acquaintances, people Dad barely knew, offered effusive condolences to the grieving widow, while I drifted through the proceedings like a phantom, my own sorrow too raw, too real for such a public display. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Monday, precisely 1 week after the funeral. The atmosphere in the house crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Brenda, however, moved with a new, unsettling air of proprietorial confidence, a subtle smirk playing on her lips whenever she thought I wasn't looking. She made a point of informing me, her tone patronizing, "The solicitor, Mr. Davies, will arrive at 2 o'clock. I trust you'll conduct yourself with decorum, Chloe. Your father would have wanted a dignified process, no emotional outbursts." The veiled threat was unmistakable. "Stay silent, accept your fate." That fateful Monday morning, less than an hour before Mr. Davies was due, Brenda approached me, her expression artfully arranged into one of gentle concern. "Chloe, darling," she began, her voice like warm honey, "I was just reminiscing. Your father had so many wonderful old photographs. Some truly precious ones must be stored in those trunks up in the attic. Could you be an absolute angel and pop up there to find a really lovely one of him from his university days? Perhaps one with your mother? It would be such a comfort to have it out today." My internal alarms didn't just ring, they shrieked. The attic? No. It was the most bizarre, ill-timed request imaginable. But I was so emotionally ground down, so weary of her constant psychological warfare, that I just nodded numbly, desperate to avoid another draining confrontation. "All right, Brenda," I mumbled, already turning towards the narrow, creaking staircase that led to the forgotten upper reaches of the house. As I climbed into the dim, dust-choked space, the familiar scent of old cedar and forgotten dreams enveloped me, a scent usually comforting, now tinged with foreboding. I tugged the pull-string for the single fly-specked bare bulb, its weak glow casting long, dancing shadows over ghostly shapes draped in white sheets, stacks of old suitcases, and generations of discarded belongings. I had just located a battered cardboard box labeled "Old Photos" when I heard it. That unmistakable, chilling sound. The metallic rasp and solid thud of a heavy bolt sliding firmly into place on the outside of the attic door. My blood ran cold. I dropped the box, photos scattering, and scrambled to the door, yanking frantically on the old brass knob. It was locked solid. "Brenda," I yelled, my voice a raw croak of disbelief. "Brenda, what are you doing? Let me out." Silence. Then her voice, muffled but chillingly clear, drifted up from the other side. "I'm so terribly sorry, Chloe dear. But this is truly for the best. Some family matters are best handled privately." The audacity, the sheer, calculated cruelty of her words, stole the air from my lungs. She had done it. She had actually locked me in the attic to ensure I missed the reading of my own father's will. Panic, raw and suffocating, seized me. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. My first instinct was pure, unadulterated terror. I hammered on the thick wooden door with my fists, screaming Brenda's name until my throat was raw, my voice cracking with a desperate cocktail of rage and fear. "Let me out of here. Brenda, you won't get away with this." Only the indifferent silence of the house answered, punctuated by the faint, distant murmur of voices from downstairs. The solicitor would be arriving any minute. She was actually going through with her plan. Tears of helpless frustration streamed down my dusty cheeks. The attic air was hot, thick with the cloying smell of mothballs and my own escalating panic. I had to think. I had to get out. I frantically scanned the tiny, grime-streaked window at the far end of the attic, but it was painted shut decades ago and far too high to offer a viable escape route without breaking my neck. The ancient floorboards groaned ominously beneath my agitated pacing, each creak a mocking reminder of my confinement. "Breathe, Chloe, breathe," I commanded myself, forcing ragged gasps of the stale air into my lungs. Falling apart wouldn't help. Brenda wanted me out of sight, out of mind. But the answer hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was terrified of what Dad's true will contained. She was terrified of me and what I represented. His love, his legacy. That realization, that tiny ember of defiance, was enough to burn through the fog of terror. I would not let her desecrate his memory. Not like this. My eyes, now more accustomed to the gloom, darted around the shadowy expanse, desperately seeking a tool, a weapon, any sliver of hope. Piles of old newspapers, a broken rocking horse, cobweb-shrouded trunks. It was a mausoleum of forgotten lives. And then, tucked away in the darkest corner, almost swallowed by the shadows behind a stack of my grandfather's old, warped canvases, I saw it. A small, distinctively shaped wooden chest. It wasn't like the other decaying relics. This piece felt different, almost deliberate. It was bound with tarnished brass, and I could just make out my father's initials, ABU, intricately carved into the dark wood of the lid. I had no memory of ever seeing it before. A jolt of adrenaline, potent and sharp, shot through me. I scrambled towards it, dragging it out from its hiding place into the weak pool of light cast by the bare bulb. The lock was old, a simple clasp mechanism but clearly secured. My mind raced. A hairpin. Too flimsy. But then my gaze fell upon a small, overturned crate beside the chest, and lying on it, as if left there intentionally, was a slender, tarnished silver letter opener. My heart began to pound a rhythm of desperate hope. With hands that trembled so violently I could barely control them, I slid the pointed tip of the letter opener into the keyhole of the chest. I wiggled it gently, listening for any give, my breath caught tight in my chest. It felt like an eternity, the only sounds the frantic thumping of my own heart and the faint metallic scraping. Then a soft, almost inaudible click. The clasp sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid, releasing a fragrant puff of cedar and aged paper into the musty air. Inside, nestled amongst neatly tied bundles of my father's old architectural blueprints and stacks of letters bound with faded silk ribbons, lay a newer-looking thick manila envelope. My name, Chloe, was written across the front in my father's distinctive, elegant cursive. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped it. This was it. This had to be what he'd tried to tell me about. This was this I so desperately needed. With trembling fingers I tore open the seal. Inside, a sheaf of documents. The top page was a letter, its ink still dark, dated only a few months prior, penned when his illness had tightened its cruel grip but before his mind had clouded. "My dearest Chloe," it began. "If you are reading these words, it means my fears about Brenda's character have unfortunately been realized. I am not and never have been blind to the subtle, then not so subtle changes in her demeanor, my girl, nor to her burgeoning avarice. This illness has ravaged my body, but it has not diminished my love for you, nor my determination to ensure your future." Tears welled, blurring his precious handwriting. He went on to detail his growing unease about Brenda, her manipulative tactics, her attempts to isolate him from friends and, most painfully, from me. He described how he'd discreetly begun to document her actions. Beneath the letter lay the true bombshell. A legally executed, notarized codicil to his will, signed and witnessed just weeks before he became too weak to hold a pen. It stated in clear, unequivocal legal language that his previous will, the one Brenda undoubtedly knew about and was banking on, was to be considered null and void if specific conditions regarding his care were not met by Brenda, or if there was any substantiated evidence of her exerting undue influence or coercive control concerning his estate. Conditions she had flagrantly, repeatedly violated. He had meticulously listed specific instances: her restricting his access to legal counsel, her misrepresenting his wishes to medical staff, her relentless pressure regarding certain assets. He even mentioned her strange fascination with the attic. She once made a chillingly casual remark about family secrets being buried up here, he wrote. I leave this for you, my clever, resourceful daughter, trusting that you will find it should the worst come to pass. He had also included damning copies of emails Brenda had exchanged with her sister, intercepted by his loyal longtime personal assistant, emails in which Brenda gloated about how she would soon be in control of Arthur's considerable fortune. And the final devastating blow to her scheme: a sworn affidavit from his trusted lawyer, Mr. Henderson, detailing Brenda's persistent and aggressive attempts to have Dad change his will entirely in her favor, all of which Dad had steadfastly refused. The last item in the envelope was a small, antique-looking brass key, securely taped to a piece of stiff card. This opens my private safe deposit box at Merchants Bank, the note beneath it read. The original of this codicil, along with further comprehensive proofs, are secured there. My solicitor, Mr. Henderson, the one Brenda has always so vehemently disliked, holds the other key and is aware of its contents. My father, my brilliant, loving father, had outplayed her from beyond the grave. My grief for him was still a raw, gaping wound, but now it was intertwined with a fierce, surging tide of righteous determination. Brenda thought she had me neutralized, trapped and helpless. She had absolutely no idea that I was holding the architect's plans for her complete and utter ruin. Now the only question was how to escape this dusty prison and deliver the final act. I looked at the flimsy attic door, then at a solid old-fashioned mahogany coat rack propped against a nearby wall. An idea, reckless but necessary, began to form. It was time for the curtain to rise on Brenda's downfall. My immediate, pressing challenge was the bolted attic door. My earlier frantic pounding and desperate screams had yielded nothing but a sore throat and the grim realization that Brenda fully intended for me to remain her prisoner until her fraudulent victory was secured. But Dad's letter, his incredible foresight and unwavering faith in me, had ignited a roaring fire in my soul. This was no longer just about my inheritance. This was about honoring him, about fighting for his memory, for the justice he so meticulously planned for. I dragged the heavy oak coat rack over to the door. Its base was sturdy. I managed to wedge one of its thick wooden arms under the doorknob. Then, using a stack of heavy leather-bound ledgers as a makeshift fulcrum, I threw all my weight onto the other end. The old wood of the doorframe groaned in protest, a high-pitched shriek of stressed timber. Splinters flew, stinging my hands. It was brute force, not finesse, but it was working. I strained, every muscle in my body screaming, sweat stinging my eyes, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate hope. With a final sickening crack that echoed through the silent attic, the wood around the latch splintered, buckled, and then gave way entirely. The door burst inward with a deafening crash, sending me staggering back, the coat rack clattering to the floor. I was free. Clutching the manila envelope like a sacred relic, I practically flew down the narrow, rickety attic stairs, my heart hammering a wild rhythm against my ribs. The lower floors of the house were eerily, unnaturally quiet. Then I heard it, the low, sonorous drone of voices emanating from the formal living room. Brenda, undoubtedly, and the solicitor she had handpicked for this charade, Mr. Davies, the one Dad's letter had warned me was too easily swayed by her. I took a moment on the landing, smoothing my disheveled hair, wiping the layers of grime and cobwebs from my face and clothes as best I could. I took a deep, steadying breath, picturing Dad's encouraging smile. This was it. Showtime. I walked into the living room with as much composure as I could muster. Brenda was perched elegantly on the edge of the plush velvet sofa, a porcelain teacup balanced delicately in her hand, the very picture of bereaved sophistication. Mr. Davies, a portly man with small, nervous eyes that darted around the room, was seated in the armchair opposite her. A sheaf of official-looking papers, no doubt the fraudulent will Brenda was so eager to have validated, lay on the polished mahogany coffee table between them. Both their heads snapped up as I entered, their polite conversation ceasing abruptly. Brenda's eyes widened just for a fraction of a second, her carefully constructed mask of serene grief faltering before she quickly schooled her features. But I saw it. A flicker of pure, unadulterated fear. "Good, Chloe," she exclaimed, her voice a pitch too high, a shade too bright. "Darling, what on earth happened to you? You look as though you've been exploring a coal mine." I was beginning to get quite concerned. We were just about to start the proceedings. Her feigned solicitude was so transparent it was almost laughable. "Were you Brenda?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm but with an edge of cold steel. I advanced further into the room, deliberately placing Dad's manila envelope on the coffee table with a decisive thud, right beside Mr. Davies's neatly stacked documents. As it seems I was unavoidably detained. Brenda's smile became a thin, brittle line. "Detained? My dear Chloe, don't be so melodramatic. I simply asked you to locate an old photograph. Did you get lost in the rafters?" "Lost?" I echoed, allowing a small, humorless laugh to escape. "No, Brenda. I was locked in the attic. By you." Mr. Davies cleared his throat, a nervous, fluttering sound. Now, Miss Wallace. Mrs. Gable." "Mrs. Gable," I corrected him sharply, my gaze fixed unblinkingly on Brenda. Clearly thought it would be more convenient if I were absent for this little gathering. Perhaps she was concerned about what I might contribute. Or, more accurately, what Dad himself might have to contribute. I tapped the manila envelope meaningfully. Brenda's face had gone deathly pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, her knuckles showing white as she gripped her teacup so tightly I thought it might shatter. "I have no idea what nonsense you're spouting. That is a preposterous and frankly insulting accusation." "Is it really?" I countered, my voice gaining strength. "Because I happened to find something rather illuminating up there in the dust and shadows. Something Dad very specifically wanted me to find. Something he hid because he knew you, Brenda. He knew exactly what you were capable of." With deliberate slowness, I opened the envelope and laid out its contents one by one. Dad's heartbreaking letter, the notarized codicil, the damning copies of her treacherous emails, and the sworn affidavit from Mr. Henderson. Mr. Davies's jaw practically hit his chest as his eyes scanned the documents. Brenda stared at them as if they were venomous snakes, her composure finally spectacularly crumbling. Her face, normally a study in artful control, contorted into an ugly mask of raw disbelief and seething rage. Those are forgeries," she shrieked, her voice cracking, lunging across the coffee table in a desperate attempt to snatch the papers. I was faster. I swept them out of her reach. "Oh, I assure you, Brenda, they are exquisitely real. And Mr. Henderson, Dad's actual long-standing and trusted legal counsel, not only possesses the originals but also holds the second key to Dad's safe deposit box, where even more irrefutable proof of your activities resides." Mr. Davies, looking increasingly horrified and clearly desperate to extricate himself from the rapidly sinking ship of Brenda's deception, picked up the codicil. He read it slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving silently. Then his eyebrows shot up towards his receding hairline. He looked from the document to a now trembling Brenda, then back to me, his expression one of dawning shock and professional alarm. This appears to be an entirely valid and legally binding codicil, Mrs. Gable," he announced, his formal tone barely concealing his astonishment. "And it substantially and fundamentally alters the terms of the testamentary document I have before me." "Alters?" Brenda shrieked again, her voice shrill and ragged. "He can't do that. I devoted myself to him. Cared for him. I loved him." "Did you truly, Brenda?" I asked, my voice soft now but carrying the weight of undeniable truth. "Did you love him when you systematically isolated him from everyone who genuinely cared? When you tried to poison his mind against his own daughter? When you gleefully wrote to your sister detailing your plans to, and I quote, bleed him dry and ensure the little brat gets absolutely nothing?" I recited the line directly from one of her own damning emails. The color drained completely from her face, leaving it a ghastly, mottled gray. She looked utterly cornered, exposed, her intricate web of lies shredded before her very eyes. This codicil, Mr. Davies continued, his voice gaining a new note of authority as he clearly sided with the overwhelming evidence, explicitly states that if Mr. Wallace was subjected to any form of undue influence, manipulation, or coercive control regarding his estate, or if his meticulously specified care instructions were demonstrably neglected, then the status of primary beneficiary for, well, for you, Mrs. Gable, is unequivocally revoked. And it would appear from this substantial documentation that Mr. Wallace diligently recorded that these conditions were, indeed, comprehensively breached. Brenda was rendered utterly speechless, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and impotent fury. The elaborate tapestry of deceit she had so carefully woven over years was unraveling with devastating speed. The satisfaction blooming in my chest was immense. A clean, pure wave of justice finally, blessedly, arriving. My beloved father, even in his absence, had shielded me. He had ensured that truth and integrity would prevail. Brenda, the consummate manipulator, the greedy interloper, had been comprehensively outmaneuvered by the very man she had so callously sought to betray. The ensuing silence in the room was thick and heavy, broken only by Brenda's harsh, ragged gasps for air. Her reign of calculated cruelty was definitively, irrevocably over. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom of legal activity. Mr. Davies, transparently eager to salvage his professional reputation from the wreckage of Brenda's duplicity, quickly and deferentially yielded to Mr. Henderson, Dad's steadfast and honorable solicitor. The codicil, supported by Dad's meticulous documentation, was validated without the slightest contention. The evidence against Brenda was simply overwhelming and irrefutable. Her systematic scheming, her calculated isolation of Dad, her poison pen emails, it all came spilling out into the stark light of day. The will she had so confidently counted on, the one that would have made her the sole inheritor of Dad's considerable life's work, was rendered utterly worthless. Instead, Dad's true and final wishes, as so clearly articulated in the codicil and his poignant letter to me, were faithfully executed. He left Brenda the bare legal minimum stipulated by state law for a surviving spouse, a pittance compared to the fortune she had plotted to acquire, and even that small sum was heavily contested due to her egregious conduct. The vast majority of his estate, the beloved family home, his carefully managed investments, his treasured art collection, and all his personal effects, came directly to me, precisely as he had always intended. Brenda, predictably, did not accept her defeat with grace. There were furious tantrums, hollow threats of countersuits, and increasingly desperate, rambling accusations leveled against me, against Dad's memory, against Mr. Henderson, against anyone who dared to stand in the way of her entitlement. But her audience had dwindled to nothing. Her carefully crafted mask of respectability had been ripped away, revealing the grasping, manipulative individual she truly was beneath. The charge of false imprisonment for locking me in the attic was pursued vigorously. While she managed to avoid actual jail time, much to my initial frustration, she was slapped with a substantial fine, a lengthy probation period, and a strictly enforced restraining order that permanently barred her from approaching me or the house. The glittering social standing she had craved and schemed for evaporated overnight. Word of her deceit spread like wildfire through the community. She was a pariah. Eventually, disgraced and financially crippled, she moved out of state, a bitter, diminished figure, a stark contrast to the wealthy, revered widow she had so arrogantly envisioned herself becoming. In the months that followed, my life slowly began to find its new rhythm. The ache of grief for my father remained, a constant, tender presence that I knew would always be a part of me. But now, intertwined with that sorrow was a profound and abiding sense of gratitude, and an overwhelming love for his incredible foresight, his unwavering courage, and his ultimate act of protection. I chose to keep his house, our sanctuary. It was filled with his spirit, his laughter, his love, no longer overshadowed by the toxic miasma of Brenda's presence. I found an old, half-used pouch of his favorite pipe tobacco in his study drawer, and sometimes I would simply open it and inhale the rich, familiar aroma, a small, bittersweet comfort. I threw myself into my marketing career with a newfound passion and determination, fueled by an inner strength I hadn't known I possessed until Brenda's cruelty forced me to unearth it. Looking back, the entire ordeal was a harrowing descent into the worst aspects of human nature. The betrayal by someone who had, however briefly, been considered family, cut deeper than I could have imagined. But through that darkness, I learned invaluable lessons about resilience, about the enduring, unyielding power of truth, and about the quiet, immensely satisfying click of karmic justice finally falling into place. Brenda attempted to steal my future, my security, and most unforgivably, my father's precious legacy. But in her desperate, foolish act of locking me in that dusty attic, she inadvertently, almost poetically, handed me the very key to her own undoing. My father taught me many invaluable lessons throughout his life, but perhaps the greatest of all was one he demonstrated so powerfully even after he was gone, that integrity, love, and courage will always, in the end, triumph over greed, deceit, and malice. And that, I have come to realize, is the most valuable and enduring inheritance anyone could ever receive.